Wales bringing some rain, and for western parts of Northern Ireland as well, but colder across northern England and Wales. We may see some breaks in the cloud to give a touch of frost as well, but otherwise largely dry with a lot of cloud as we go Sunday night and into Monday morning. So as we go through the evening, then we've got this band of rain continuing to move its way slowly eastwards into western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and eventually into northern England. Across much of England and Wales, though, hold on to a lot of cloud, some clear spells that may allow temperatures to fall to give a touch of frost and some mist and fog patches. So another cold start to Monday morning, touch of frost in places, but again, a lot of cloud around. There will be some showers across northwestern parts of Scotland with some sunshine here and some rain just sinking into parts of northern Wales as well. But on the whole, largely a dry picture on Monday. Temperature just slightly up on what we've seen over the weekend, highs of 5 to 9 degrees. Bye-bye for now.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Ironic article in The Guardian, Nick, caring about facts.
Yeah, this is Meta is ushering in a world without facts, says Nobel Peace Prize winner. And they just seem to give these Nobel Peace Prizes to anyone these days. So it's Maria Ressa.
Not working.
Zuckerberg came out, and it was very bold. He said a few things. We're going to use community notes instead of fact checkers. Fact checkers in inverted commas, it just means people pushing usually a specific viewpoint. Community notes seems to be a great system that X uses, so why not do that? I think that's great. He's going to reduce restrictions on topics like immigration and gender. Good, because I'm against censorship. He's going to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more, which is great. He's also moving content moderation to Texas instead of California, which is banter. So now the cynical version is he just realises we've got a new regime, it's the MAGA era, and I want to be mates with Trump, who said that I should that if I interfere with the 2024 election, he should spend the rest of his life in prison. So he did mention he might be a bit scared of that. He was involved in that, in Facebook suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, and I feel that he didn't like being a part of all that from watching.
And also the suppression of arguments about gender and sex, what is biological sex and whatnot. You get banned for saying there are two sexes.
They were on the wrong side of this, and now he's correcting. But the weird thing is the people, of course, the people who don't like this, the lefties, this person, Ressa, is saying that this is a big problem. It's an extremely dangerous time. I've seen all this from the lefties. They just call it disinformation. They're worried about this because to them it's disinformation. To other people it's information.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we can all agree if people think they're getting their facts just directly from Facebook, then something's horribly wrong. But we know that. The community notes thing, I think, is quite good because that sort of first-hand experience people are putting down, aren't they?
Yeah. People have loads of different views come together, and it's an aggregate, so that's why it works.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. It has, of course, been a huge week for news with the ceasefire in Gaza, which has come into effect within the past 15 minutes. We will, of course, be keeping you updated with the release of 3 hostages. There's also Donald Trump's inauguration tomorrow night, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves's future still hanging in the balance, despite the Prime Minister's insistence that she's doing a fantastic job. And as ever, we've got a stellar lineup of guests to discuss it all. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, will be on today's show. I'll be asking him whether the Chancellor can weather the financial storm caused by their autumn budget. Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, will be joining me from Washington, D.C. ahead of the President-elect Trump's return to the White House. I'll also be speaking to the veteran Conservative MP Sir David Davis about Kemi Badenoch's performance so far and why he thinks the killer nurse Lucy Letbury may be innocent. Tory peer and businessman Lord Moynihan will join me in the studio to talk about the new volume of his book, Return to Growth, How to Fix the Economy. Let's hope Darren Jones stays around for that. And I'll be talking to the former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood, who is also in Washington, D.C. He's going to be speaking about Trump's inauguration, along with Tim Hames, the author of a new book, Trump 2, Why He Won, as we usher in this new world order. As ever, we've got 90 minutes of punchy politics to get through, so don't go anywhere. So don't worry, we're still going to have a look at the Sunday papers, and there's a lot to get through because, of course, we've got the latest on the ceasefire, and actually Sunday papers are slightly out of date because of what's been developing here this morning. We're going to keep you posted with that. Just to remind you, we've got the names of 3 hostages that are due to be released at 2 p.m. our time. So that is the British hostage Emily Damari, who's 28, also Romy Gonan, who is 24. She was at that Nova Music Festival when she was kidnapped on October the 7th, and Doran Steinbrecher, who is 31 and a veterinary nurse. So 3 young women there, and we will hopefully be seeing them being released this afternoon, and GB News will, of course, be keeping you abreast of breaking news there. Lots of stories in the papers today about Team Trump and whether they're going to be able to get on very well with Keir Starmer, but somebody who is in Washington, D.C. now is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, who joins us. Lovely to see you this morning, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Thank you for getting up early for this media round. Lovely to see you. Look, what do you make of the reports coming out of the Middle East? We think that Emily Damari, who is one of the British hostages, will be released this afternoon. Strikes me that this ceasefire has seemed as if it's on a bit of a knife edge. We've had the resignation of Ben Gavar, a very hard right minister in Netanyahu's government. How do you think the coming hours are going to play out?
Well, look, Camilla, first of all, thank you for having me on the programme this morning. This is an incredibly fragile and delicate time. There's no question about that. And, you know, as we're speaking, in the last hour, we heard that there were some challenges around the ceasefire. But importantly, we now know that 3 hostages will be released today. And none of us can imagine the level of anxiety that those families of the hostages will be feeling right now. So I think, you know, we've got to really think of them. And as ever, we urge everyone to really work together. This is a really, really pivotal time. The ceasefire, the negotiation, the talks that have taken place, everything that's led us to this particular moment is, you know, is incredible. But at the same time, we have to be deeply, deeply careful. I think quite cautious as well, because this is fragile. It's a very fragile and delicate situation. We know that this will be phased over a period of time with hostage releases. But I think importantly, all parties must really come together. And one, you know, we can't imagine as well, you know, there are big burdens and pressures on the Israeli government. They have a duty to the hostage families as well to do everything they possibly can to get the hostages released, all the hostages released. And I think that's what we all want to see.
I think we can agree that Donald Trump's role in all this has been instrumental, not least after he threatened that all hell would break out if the hostages weren't released, or at least news of a ceasefire by the time he has his inauguration on Monday night. We've got quite a lot of reporting in the papers here about Team Trump wanting to exact revenge on Starmer for meddling in the US election, question marks over whether Lord Mandelson will still be able to be the UK ambassador to the US. Will it be blocked by Trump? Trump. And then we have this morning Sadiq Khan warning about the march of fascism as Trump takes power again, suggesting that there is going to be resurgent fascism, not only as a result of Trump re-entering the White House, but also because of the rise of people like Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Is this helpful rhetoric?
No, of course it's not. And I think Sadiq Khan's comments are absolutely unacceptable. There is so much that's unacceptable about Sadiq Khan's views and comments, but you won't be surprised by what I think about that. Look, the reality is President Trump is going to be inaugurated tomorrow in that building behind me. He has won a huge mandate. The American people have put their hopes and trust and confidence in him to deliver for the people of America, for this great country, but also importantly for us, and I say this as a Conservative, you know, I've been invited here by our sister party, the Republican Party. We have strong and enduring ties and links with our sister party. We've always stood shoulder to shoulder as two countries, and that's where we should be again. The challenge and the onus now is on Sir Keir Starmer, his Labour government. Perhaps his mayor should, you know, really now just keep his views to himself, because Trump has a mandate and a big majority, and we should respect that. And I would also say the same about Khan's comments about Giorgia Meloni. She has a mandate and a majority to run her country. It's not for him to give a running commentary. It really isn't. The onus now is on Keir Starmer's government to step up and rebuild links and relationships with the Trump administration, with the new coming administration. It is not surprising that I think the newspapers are speculating about what that relationship is going to be. It's inevitable, primarily because Labour do not have a good, strong, solid track record, unlike the Conservative Party, when it comes to working with the Trump government. I was in the last Conservative government where I worked with the first Trump government on major issues such as national security, homeland security, home affairs. And so we have a solid track record, both in government and out of government with our sister
Priti
party.
Patel, is it true to say, and I know you have got good relationships with Republicans, but isn't it true to say that actually the person with the best relationship with Donald Trump right now, who could be the conduit between the UK and the US, is actually your rival in reform, Nigel Farage?
Well, look, I don't agree with that whatsoever, because, as I've said, both in government and out of government, our ties are enduring. And, you know, we work with the Republican Party and we support each other. Our relationship is based on long-standing values, you know, values about freedom, democracy, and what we have achieved historically together. You can't airbrush that out. And we know Labour like to airbrush history and rewrite history. But specifically, you've asked me about reform. There's a massive difference. Our ties are enduring. We're not a pop-up in the way in which reform are. And of course, there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in the relationship. You know, politics is built upon relationships and trust, but also mutual respect. And that's something that is really deep. It's entrenched in my party in terms of that relationship we have with our sister party, the Republican Party.
Can I ask you just one domestic question before you go, Priti Patel? I was just looking back at some of the work that you tried to do on the grooming gang child rape scandal in this country. And there's a report from 2020 where it suggests that you felt you were being given the runaround, and I quote, by officials at the Home Office when it came to trying to produce a probe into the ethnicity of some of the perpetrators of these appalling crimes. When you were at the Home Office, did you find that civil servants blocked your inquiries into this?
Well, first of all, Camilla, thank you for raising this, because it's a really, really important issue, and it spans a very significant period of time now. You've asked me about my time at the Home Office on this. I set up something called the External Reference Group that looked into the characteristics of the perpetrators of these awful, abhorrent rape grooming gangs. And on that basis, I brought in a range of people, including a fellow colleague from the Labour Party, Sarah Champion. We worked with one of the victims and survivors, Sammy Woodhouse, and we brought her on as well, because I felt it was so important to have the voices and the insights and, dare I say it, the experiences of those that knew so much about this, but also who knew so much about the perpetrators, the communities, the groups of people, and the characteristics of those that were involved. It was difficult. I'll be very honest about that. I personally felt institutionally there were there was a degree of denial. There was a culture of denial and institutionally, and by that I mean the institutions of the state, a government department, just did not want to tackle head on some of these issues around specific communities that were responsible for these absolutely abhorrent crimes against young girls in some of the communities and parts of the country that we're learning more about now.
OK, Priti Patel, we have to leave it there. I know you've got a busy morning and indeed a busy night ahead. So thank you very much indeed for your time today, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Well, thank you very much. There we have it. We're going to be speaking to Darren Jones in just a minute. I've also got David Davis coming on the show. We'll be speaking to Tobias Elwood, again from Washington, D.C., for his thoughts on whether, and this is a suggestion that's been made by Piers Morgan in the week to me on The Telegraph, Donald Trump could actually be in line to win the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in the Middle East. Lots to discuss. Don't go anywhere.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello. Well, if it's some winter sunshine you're after across Europe, it's not all that promising. There's a lot of unsettled weather around. So there's heavy spells of rain across parts of Madeira and Spain and Portugal with this area of low pressure. Another area of low pressure across central Mediterranean, bringing outbreaks of rain, strong winds and even some mountain snow. Best of the sunshine really confined towards Eastern Europe, otherwise staying largely unsettled. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
People living with obesity are people, and they deserve the right for treatment and care as much as anyone else. What we need to understand is that obesity is a chronic condition or a disease, as some people call it. It's not a choice. And this is the bit that people really struggle with, is that people think this is a lifestyle choice and people have done this to themselves. What we now know is the science and the evidence shows us that this isn't a choice. People have genetic predispositions for living with obesity. What we need to do is be a bit more compassionate and caring to people that live with obesity and support them to make healthier choices, not actually just discriminate and tell them that they're doing something wrong when, you know, if I had asthma, for instance, you wouldn't be saying the same thing to me there. But then it's exactly the same.
Usually, if you're going for an operation of some form or other, there'll be often there is a criteria. So my mother, she had a knee operation. They wanted to make sure her blood pressure was right and all these things. This is, I mean, to hear somebody say that obesity isn't a choice just because you've got genetic predisposition to it, it's just exactly why people seem to be legitimizing being overweight. Ozempic has proved that people are overweight because they eat too much. Because Ozempic tells you to stop eating, it makes you think that you've eaten and makes you feel full, so you don't eat. You may be predisposed to anything, but you also have a large percentage of responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. So absolutely, it is in the patient's best interests, because if you're overweight, it'll take you longer to heal. You're more likely to have complications, the same if you smoke, and also the outcomes are usually better. So for a smoker, if you quit, say 4 weeks before surgery, your 25%, your risk is lower of respiratory complications. So this is literally, of course, it's discriminatory, because you have to decide, you have to prioritise the people that are likely to survive the operations.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Joining me now is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. Mr. Jones, lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Just mindful of ongoing events in the Middle East, where we hope that at least 3 hostages will be released in the next few hours. There's quite a lot of reporting in today's Sunday papers about Labour's not brilliant relationship with Trump and his administration. We've got suggestions even that Donald Trump may block Lord Mandelson as ambassador. And then in the Observer Online today, we have Sadiq Khan, the Labour Mayor of London, suggesting that Trump's inauguration may mark a resurgence of fascism. Is that the right language for the London Mayor to be using in line with UK-US relations?
Good morning, Camilla. It's not the position of the UK government, as you would imagine. Our relationship between the UK and the United States is a long and important one. And I think if we step back from some of the gossip and who said what in the newspapers, I think we should be pretty confident as the United Kingdom. What we do matters. We have an important role in the world. We have great assets here in the United Kingdom, and our trade and security relationships with the United States are foundational, and I think there will be plenty of opportunities under the Trump administration for us to work together, both in the British interest but also in the interest of the United States of America, and we look forward to doing that work with the new administration.
But what will the Labour government do if Trump does decide to block Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US?
Well, look, that's just gossip from an unnamed source somewhere in the world. I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. I just don't think that's true, to be honest. Peter Mandelson is a senior and experienced politician that's worked on the world stage, as well as we all know, extensively at home here in UK government. And he will be a brilliant ambassador for us in the United States. And look, this is the first time in 50 years that a British Prime Minister has picked a politician to be our ambassador in the United States. We want to do things differently. Our diplomats have done a brilliant job, including Karen Pierce. But Peter Mandelson is a senior and respected politician with a lot of experience on trade and trading relationships between countries around the world. And I think that sets the type of relationship that we want to have going forward with the new administration.
Let's move on to domestic matters. You've released a press release today suggesting that you're going to be taking money out of benefit cheats bank balances. You're going to actually raid their bank accounts for money that they may have taken fraudulently in benefits. Although, didn't you announce this last year? This was as part of the budget, so it's not a new announcement, is it?
Well, it's announcing that the legislation is now coming, and importantly, this is legislation being put in place because there's been an increase in criminal fraudulent gangs essentially trying to get money out of the welfare system. This is not about people genuinely in need on benefits or people in work with their pay slips, but these are new powers so that where there are criminals who we don't have a relationship with through either benefits or HMRC, we have the powers to be able to recover taxpayers' money from them directly. And I mean, this is big money. It's about £1.5 billion that looks like it's being taken illegally by these organised criminals. And it's right that we have powers to be able to get taxpayers' money back from them and to put that into frontline public services.
But with 9.3 million people currently economically inactive or not working, then clearly there's a need to get the welfare bill down considerably. I know your colleague, the Work and Pensions Secretary, has spoken about this, but can you give us a figure on how much you want to cut the welfare bill by?
Oh, well, look, so this is a different class to the criminal gangs we've just talked about, but you're right to point to the fact that there are an increasing number of people who are economically active, i.e. they can work and want to work, but who are not getting access to NHS appointments or mental health services when they're sick, and so they're at home waiting a long time to get the treatment that they need so that they can get back to work. And that's a problem for them, and we want to help them to get back into work because that's what they want to do, and it's a good thing for the economy. But to your point, there's also a problem for me and my colleagues in the Treasury because whilst you're paying out universal credit to people who want to work but can't work, obviously that is an expensive thing to do. And so we're working across departments, across the Department for Health, Department for Work and Pensions. It's a growing number, so we need to make it flat, and then we need to get more people into work. I don't have a number for you today, Camilla, because as I say, it's a moving number, but the principle is important, which is people who are able to work and want to work, but are waiting in a queue to get the health treatment that they need. We want to make sure they get treated quicker than they are right now and that they get support to be able to go back to work. That's in their interest, it's what they want to do, and it's also good for the economy and what people would expect this government to be doing.
You must know how much the welfare bill is and how much you want to cut it by.
So the Office of Budget Responsibility does a forecast because this is what's called annually managed expenditure. It's basically demand-led. If you need to claim universal credit and you qualify, you're allowed to claim it. So you can't guess how many people that might affect. So the OBR will do a forecast twice a year, looking at lots of statistics from across the country to try to estimate the demand. The next time we will get a forecast from the OBR will be on the 26th of March.
OK, so you haven't actually committed to cutting the welfare bill by a specific amount yet?
We've committed to supporting people to get back to work. We have a Get Britain Working green paper that will be being published soon, which will talk about our policy approach to doing that. So there'll be more detail coming in the next few weeks or months.
Your colleague Rachel Reeves has said she wants to be known as the, quotes, Iron Chancellor. Is that credible with everything that's happened since the budget? We've had borrowing costs at an all-time high. We've had national insurance increases that have hammered businesses. We've got a drop in consumer confidence. We've got no growth, or 0.1% in recent times. We've got fears that interest rates might actually go up, not down. It's not really the mark of an iron chancellor, is it, Mr. Jones?
Well, look, there's no denying the fact that this government inherited an economy on its knees with a huge amount of debt that the Conservatives built up over 14 years in government that we now have to deal with public services on their knees and no growth in the economy. That was the starting point that this party, that the Labour Party inherited coming into government.
And the budget was meant to address that, but it's made it worse.
It hasn't, because the budget dealt with the £22 billion black hole, gave stability to public spending over the years ahead, and sent a very clear signal to the markets and to the public that our fiscal rules are non-negotiable. And look, you asked me whether Rachel Reeves is the Iron Chancellor, and she absolutely is. Some commentators and newspapers completely lost their heads over the last few days, based on international markets moving in the way they do every now and
with
again.
respect, didn't the Labour Party lose their heads when international markets moved against Liz Truss? You all became quite hysterical and were talking about her crushing.
That was a very different. That was a very
borrowing costs are up to a similar high, aren't they?
The UK was an outlier. No, but it's very, very different, Camilla. Internationally, the cost of borrowing for governments has increased. Just to look at the facts, whereas when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, the UK was a complete outlier. It wasn't affecting American or German or French government borrowing. It was UK borrowing because Liz Truss was negligent and played fast and loose with the economy. That is absolutely, in clear contrast, very different to the fact that international gilt yields are now higher because of international
Why do you think that a millionaire is leaving the UK every 45 minutes now, and that's a figure that's been derived since Rachel Reeves' budget? Why are so many millionaires leaving if she's doing such a good job?
Well, I'm not one, so you might have to ask them. But I think what you're alluding to is our policy.
You take the taxes of millionaires, so you should be able to comment.
Which, well, the non-dom tax changes were in our manifesto. It's what we were elected on with a mandate to implement. And it starts with, I think, the pretty fair principle that if you want to live in the UK, you should pay your taxes in the UK like everybody else. That wasn't the case under the Conservatives. We made that very clear in the election campaign that we would change that. We have done that in line with our election mandate and our manifesto.
Is it a successful policy if it drives millionaires out of the country that do pay their taxes?
I think the principle is the right one, which is that if you want to live in the UK, you need to pay taxes in the UK like everybody else.
Yes.
That's what we've implemented, and that's what the British people voted for when they elected a Labour government.
No, but I think the principle is the right one, that millionaires should pay their taxes. Let's agree on that point, Mr. Jones. I think everyone listening and watching GB News will agree with you there. But what the policy succeeded in doing is driving a millionaire out of the country that might have been paying tax to you at the Treasury every 45 minutes. So that's not a success, is it? It's a failure if fewer millionaires are paying tax. I don't understand how you could constitute it as being anything other than a failure.
Sure, but Camilla, you agreed with the principle that if you live in the UK, you should pay tax in the UK like everybody else.
Yes, so you're driving out millionaires who are paying tax.
Because But you can't agree with the principle and disagree with the practice, Camilla. I mean, I think we both agree that if you want to live in the UK, you should pay your taxes here. That's
You're
what the
misunderstanding
policy is,
me.
doing in place.
Everyone thinks millionaires should pay tax. We love millionaires because they pay more tax than people on the minimum wage. But what I'm saying you've done is you've forced millionaires to leave the country because it's not economically viable for them to remain here with a tax burden at such a high. Therefore, the policy has been self-defeating. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying.
No, I do, Camilla, but what you're also suggesting is that we shouldn't have changed the non-dom tax status. I'm telling you that that's in clear conflict with the principle that we both agree with, that if you live here, you should pay your fair taxes here. That's just the basis on which our manifesto was set, and that was what we were implementing. And quite frankly, people who were affected by that had quite a lot of notice because we were very clear about that in opposition and during the election campaign.
OK, but do you understand that the principles of something may be good, like slap VAT on private school fees, but the practicalities might be bad? Oh, no, we're now causing a load of schools which look after special needs children to close down. Principles are one thing, practice is another. Maybe the Labour government is guilty of having great ideas but bad execution. Could that be the case?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. All right, Mr. Jones, thank you very much. And also, final question. Lord Hermer seems to be dictating a great deal of government policy on the interests of his private clients. Are you concerned about his role as Attorney General?
I'd be very careful how you structure that question, Camilla. Lord Hermer is an outstanding lawyer. He no longer has private clients. He works for the government. And as the lead government legal advisor, as is normal practice with legally privileged information, that remains private. There is no suggestion, as you put in your question, that Lord Hermer is acting for private clients whilst at the same time acting as Attorney General. That is just factually incorrect.
Didn't actually say the question like that, but thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, Darren Jones. We'll be getting onto that story in just a minute with my Telegraph colleague, Annabelle Denham. Don't go anywhere.
This January, history will be made again.
Join GB News as we bring you full coverage of Donald Trump's presidential inauguration.
From the swearing-in ceremony to the celebrations, we'll be there to capture every moment that shapes the next chapter of world politics.
The best guests, live updates and unparalleled insight as Donald Trump becomes the 47th President of the United States. The inauguration tomorrow from 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Aaron McLean, the goal machine here, used to play for Peterborough United. You bagged loads of goals for them back in the day. But I've got a bone to pick with you, young man. You scored at the City ground against Nottingham Forest for, was it Hull City?
For Hull City, yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, that was my job, unfortunately. I must say, that was actually one of my favourite goals.
Was it really?
Because I remember, obviously, playing at the City ground, unbelievable stadium, historic.
It is great.
So, and we beat you 1-0.
OK, no need to rub it in. These sports clubs, whether it's football or rugby or whatever, should offer two alternatives, either a professional footballer, or if you don't quite make it, you can still go and play football at a lower level, but have a career as well, maybe be an electrician or a plumber.
100%. You know, listen, I've had multiple conversations with various different people, whether it's the PFA or whether it's clubs. Even players who do have careers, you know, there's so many that don't make it and don't quite make it to the level or only play at a lower level. There's so many that do have long careers, but once you come to the end of that, you've spent, you know, for me, I spent 20 years as a professional footballer. Once I finished playing, what do you then do for the rest of your life? You know, at 35, once you retire, you still have to have a purpose in life. Yeah. But I'd almost be starting from ground zero. I'm fortunate that I went into coaching and then went into the media.
That's good.
But for every one of me, there's hundreds that don't. And I've got so many friends who, I've got to say, you know, have really, really struggled on the, you know, mental health side.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because you go from, like, playing in stadiums, big stadiums, small stadiums, crowds, singing your name, and all that sort of stuff, that adulation, the buzz of winning games, and you know, the downs of losing games, and you go from that to sort of nothing when you finish. I mean, that's a big come down there.
It's a huge come down.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lots more still to come on today's programme, including our Sunday morning paper review with Annabel Denham. I'll also be speaking to the Conservative MP Sir David Davis, Tory Life peer Lord Moynihan, author and columnist Tim Hames, and former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood, who will be joining us from Washington, D.C. But first, here's your news headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Camilla. The time is just after 10 o'clock and these are your latest headlines. In the last hour, a ceasefire has commenced between Israel and Hamas. This comes as Hamas handed over the names of 3 hostages set to be released at 2 p.m. British time later today, one of whom being 28-year-old British Israeli Emily Damari. The other 2 named hostages are reportedly Romy Gonen and Doron Steinbrecher, with the Israeli PM's office saying 4 other living hostages will be released in 7 days' time. Earlier on GB News, defence editor for the Evening Standard, Robert Fox, reacted to the news of Emily Damari's release.
What I would say is that is very cunning for Hamas, because that is to reach out to the UK. And remember the International Criminal Court and so on, and, you know, that's an appeal to lawfare Starmer. It's a very interesting subset to the whole story.
Tomorrow will mark the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump as he makes his return to the White House. The soon-to-be 47th president arrived in the Washington area on Saturday evening, where he took in a fireworks display with his wife, Melania. It's expected he will also host a rally with his supporters later today in downtown Washington, although a counter-rally also took place yesterday, with thousands attending to protest the incoming president. Our GB News correspondent Steve Edgington went along to find out what people had to say.
Do I feel like it's Trump's America? Oh, hell no, not at all.
He's an old, withered up liar, felon, criminal. Eventually, all of this will come to an end because guess what? He's not living forever. I'm not afraid of Donald Trump. I think he's lawless. No one's above the law. He needs to be punished for his crimes. He committed crimes. And it's just a shame that he got reelected because he'll never see justice. But I'm not afraid. We're all here together. We'll stand up and we'll overcome this.
Staying stateside now, and social media app TikTok has reportedly gone dark in the US following a ban implemented by the outgoing Biden administration. The ban came into force after the Supreme Court passed a law last April which stated that the platform's China-based parent company, ByteDance, must have sold the platform by today, which it hasn't done. However, President-elect Donald Trump has said he would, quote, most likely give TikTok a 90-day reprieve from the ban once he takes office tomorrow. And finally, a new photograph has been released in order to mark the 60th birthday of the Duchess of Edinburgh. Sophie reaches the milestone birthday tomorrow and will celebrate the occasion privately at her home with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. All of us here at GB News wish the Duchess many happy returns. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. Now it's back to Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophie, and welcome back. Right, don't go anywhere because we've got still to come. Conservative MP Sir David Davis, he's going to be discussing all sorts of Tory matters and why he thinks Lucy Letby, the killer nurse, may be innocent. Also be speaking to the Tory Life peer Lord Moynihan, and I'll be speaking to Tobias Ellwood, the former Defence Minister, and asking him whether he agrees with Piers Morgan that Donald Trump could be in line to win a Nobel Peace Prize. But before all that, let's get into the Sunday papers with columnist and acting comment editor at The Telegraph, my colleague Annabelle Denham. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for doing a little bit of a later review, but we had Priti Patel and Darren Jones, who's questioned one of the stories I've mentioned there from the papers. We'll get on to in just a minute. Let's just give an update here just from a press conference that we've just had over in Israel. The Foreign Minister Gideon Sahar has given a press conference saying that he thinks that it will be the case that 3 hostages come out today. One of them is Emily Damari, who's a Brit, that altogether, the Israeli government is saying that they expect 33 hostages to be released in that first phase. But he has said that if Hamas stays in power, the, quotes, regional instability might continue in Gaza. He's basically saying that there can be no future peace, stability and security for both sides if Hamas stays in power. This then brings into sharp focus, Annabelle, tomorrow night's inauguration of Donald Trump back in the White House for a second time. I think we can both agree that he had a role to play in this ceasefire in the first place. But equally, we've got some rhetoric around Starmer's relationship with the Republicans and how poor it is. We've got the front of the Mail on Sunday saying Team Trump's revenge on Starmer for meddling in the US election could be that they try and block Peter Mandelson from becoming the UK's ambassador to the US. I did ask Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, about that, but he batted it away. Another story in the Sunday Times. Is Lord Mandelson at risk from MAGA, Make America Great Again? Again, a lot of coverage suggesting that the person who is the conduit to Trump is Nigel Farage, which is problematic for Labour and the Conservatives, let's be honest.
Well, it is indeed. I think the big question mark does remain over how this Labour administration is going to work with Donald Trump and his senior team. And I think there can be little doubt that it came as a surprise to Keir Starmer and to David Lammy and the rest of the cabinet that Trump was successful in November. And we know that because they sent those representatives over to help campaign for the Democrats. We know that because senior members of the administration were at the DNC last August. I think it came as a real shock to them when Donald Trump won the election in November. And, of course, you've got that history of some of the remarks that senior cabinet ministers made about Donald Trump in the late 2010s, which has been very uncomfortable for them. So there has been a lot of schmoozing that's needed to be done. And in that respect, you could argue that Peter Mandelson is quite a sensible appointment. He's somebody who was on the right of the Labour Party, one of the chief architects of New Labour, of moving the party in the 1990s away from socialism towards something that was certainly more palatable to many members of the electorate. And the question now is whether Donald Trump is going to reject those letters of credence, whether he's going to block the appointment of Peter Mandelson because he's concerned, it's reported, about his position on China. Mandelson has previously talked about having closer ties, closer relations with China, whereas Trump has made no secret of the fact that the US ought to be viewing it more as an adversary than a friend and partner.
Also, the Chagos Islands. This could get a bit tricky. So we sort of had this decision over the Chagos Islands stalled somewhat with a view to Trump coming back into the White House. Just to explain, I had a conversation with Darren Jones about this story earlier. Got a story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Attorney General in row over Chagos refugees. Starmer legal chief urged to come clean over role in asylum deal for former clients. So just to explain, Lord Hermer, who's the Attorney General, has previously been a lawyer representing different private clients as he can and as is his right and as is his want. But some of the decisions that have subsequently been made by the government, including this idea about giving Jerry Adams compensation, which appears to have been brokered by Hilary Benn and again needs to be officiated over by the Attorney General. And now this handing back of the Chagos, it emerges that Lord Hermer, when he was dealing with private clients, had some clients and he handled their asylum claim from the Chagos Islands to Britain. So there's questions now being asked as to a potential conflict of interests. What's your reaction to this story? I mean, Lord Hermer's been in the papers all week, to be fair.
No, I don't think it can come as any surprise to the Attorney General that he's coming under this scrutiny. And you're absolutely right. You know, he could previously have had private clients, but as many Attorney Generals will have done, and then come in and be the government's chief legal advisor and be able to bifurcate the two. But it's, you know, unfortunate for Lord Hermer that previous clients do include Gerry Adams and they do include these Chagos refugees, and that the government is now making decisions which appear to be going against our national interests on both of those issues. So there really are serious questions to answer. Of course, we expect our Attorney General to have integrity above reproach, and one hopes that Lord Hermer indeed does do. But at the moment, you know, it's deeply uncomfortable. And I think also that you expect the Attorney General to be very much in the background as one of the, you know, senior figures in any administration. And, you know, it's deeply uncomfortable that he is now finding himself on the front pages of all of our newspapers. And, you know, this doesn't feel like a story that's going to go away. And I suspect pressure will begin to mount from certain quarters on Keir Starmer to consider whether he should remain in post. And let's not forget that only at the beginning of this week, Tulip Sadiq, the City Minister, was forced to resign.
Yes.
And that's only a couple of months after the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, was forced to resign.
Yes.
So,
I mean, my only point to raise with Darren Jones is, you know, there's been a suggestion that it might be a conflict of interest. Clearly, it needs to be addressed. Nobody is suggesting any impropriety at all on behalf of Lord Hermer. It's just because of his private client base from yesteryear, it does pose questions about some of the direction of travel of government policy right now, which he is having to spearhead. Let's move on to a really interesting story on the front page of the Sunday Times. Third of pupils now get extra time in exams. Is this as a result of this sort of boom in diagnoses of neurodiversity and other conditions?
Yes, it is. So there's been this massive fourfold increase in just a decade in the number of pupils who are getting extra time in their exams. And it's a really interesting one, Camilla, I think, because on the one hand, it's definitely a positive that we're seeing more recognition of these conditions, that we're ensuring that pupils are getting the support that they need. But at the same time, we need to properly scrutinise it. I think we need a much deeper understanding of some of these conditions. It all feels quite new, and you have to wonder what some of the incentives are. I mean, in that story, it says that 42% of pupils in the independent sector are getting extra time in exams. And if you're a parent of the 58%, you're starting to wonder whether your child is being disadvantaged in some way in not getting extra time in their exams. And, you know, there was a question in that piece about whether there's some complicity on the part of the heads of these schools. If pupils are getting extra time, then they might perform better. And then that looks very good for the school, particularly in the private sector, which is going to struggle now with the introduction of VAT on those fees. So I think there's a lot that we don't know. Ultimately, as I say, it should be welcomed that we're getting a better understanding and that pupils are being supported and helped. But lots of questions, I think, remain unanswered. And, you know, it sort of fits into this explosion that we're getting in mental health diagnoses at the same time, of stress and anxiety and depression. And that's feeding into, you know, the welfare state and people being off work.
Fair enough, if people are really struggling, you know, they've got severe dyslexia, what have you, then of course they should get more time. But 42% in the private sector seems a little punchy. Final story, just to lighten the mood a little bit, because it's quite a heavy news day, and I just love this from The Observer. When Larry met Maggie, how Olivier gave Thatcher secret lessons in flirting. So what's been uncovered by The Observer, this is, I think, for a Radio 4 play that's going to go out in the coming days, about this unique relationship that was struck up between the Shakespearean actor and the former Prime Minister.
Well, it is reported in this story that Laurence Olivier was a quiet Tory. So perhaps it's less stranger than you might think. But no, he gave her 5 lessons in the art of seduction. And it said that she was rather nervous when she first came to meet him. But clearly they paid off, of course, because Margaret Thatcher, as the piece reports, was able to win over Gorbachev and Reagan, of course. They had that special relationship. And not only that, but Mitterrand, who was a political foe, really, but nonetheless described her as having the eyes of Caligula and the mouth of Marilyn Monroe.
I know, I love this. He advised her to take long, confident strides and use her eyes to seduce and flirt. Also told her to put a book on her head and walk around to improve her deportment. Not sure she had any problems in the department, but anyway. Annabelle Denham, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us for a slightly later paper review this morning. Lots more still to come, though. We're going to be speaking to David Davis, going to be speaking to Tobias Ellwood, who's over in DC for the inauguration tomorrow night, and I'll be discussing growth. Can Britain achieve any with Lord Moynihan, who was quite closely aligned, to be fair, to Liz Truss, and has interesting comments to make about how he thinks Rachel Reeves is faring as Chancellor. Don't move a muscle. Be back in just a jiffy.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Figures released by the National Child Measurement Programme in 2024 found that almost 1 in 10 children was obese in the first year of school. Children living in deprived areas are twice as likely to be overweight as those in more affluent parts. Organisations like the Prepped Foundation are educating youngsters about healthy eating by giving them the skills to create balanced meals. TV chef James Golding has joined the foundation as the head of food education, and he joins me now to talk about the work. James, lovely to see you here.
Good to see you too. So Prepped used to be Table Talk Foundation, and it's now obviously Prep for Life, Prep for Knowledge. It's basically a charity to encourage kids to have a better understanding of food, but at the same time enjoy cooking and hopefully make better food choices in their life, as well as perhaps, you know, share the information we give them with their families.
Do you see them developing an understanding of the difference between a healthy and unhealthy food?
Yes, I think that, you know, kids tend to sort of be taught a lot of this in school, but being able to actually ask questions to a chef and be able to cook with produce which they know is one, that is going to be tasty because they've tasted it, but two, open their eyes to food that they may not have tried before. I think that, you know, I think a lot of kids say they don't want to try stuff because they don't like the way it looks, but the way that we produce our sessions, you know, we encourage the kids to try, and I think it really does open their eyes. It's very easy, I think, currently to be able to make easier choices, say fast food choices or you know, that type of thing, and it's obviously giving people the ability to make the right choices, but also the skills to be able to do it. So I think it's something that needs to be addressed and something that really needs to be pushed, and that's what we're doing as a charity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Joining me now is the Conservative MP for Goole and Pocklington, Sir David Davis. Lovely to see you this morning, Sir David. Thank you very much for your time, as ever. Can we talk about reform? I know it's an occupational hazard for Tories these days, but does Nigel Farage seem to have something that Kemi Badenoch lacks? I know you backed Mrs Badenoch for the leadership, but you've got reform now neck and neck with the Tories in the polls. They're looking in quite a strong position ahead of the May elections, should they take place, admittedly. What do you think has been the biggest failure of the Conservative Party in opposition? Why are we in this mess?
Well, I don't think there have been such failures yet. I mean, it's quite interesting. Your last story before you switched to me was about whether or not, or rather about Margaret Thatcher being taught to flirt. I mean, I can remember her. I don't think she ever had any trouble flirting. I mean, she's one of these people who could hold the attention of everybody in the room. And that so-called Caligula eyes, that stare could hold you very easily. Now, but what it reminded you of is that over the course of 4 years, she changed. You know, she went from, frankly, a slightly shrill sometimes and prickly person to a commander of the known world. And that took time. But with it also came a whole load of new policies, the solutions to issues that had never been solved before. And that's the same problem, not the character things, but the policy things that face Kemi Badenoch now. And it'd be a great risk, in my view, if we suddenly started to try and emulate reform or have them dictate our strategy. It will take us 2, 3, 4 years to get the answers right for the international policy problems. And if we suddenly try and say, oh, right, well, we're going to have to match Farage on this or match Farage on that, you try and outflank Nigel Farage to the right, he'll just keep going further right. I mean, I know him well. He's an old friend. You know,
I know, but
so
you say that. I mean, lots of people say, David, you know, Reform's manifesto is the kind of conservative manifesto people used to enjoy in the 80s and 90s. You know, there was nothing particularly hard, right, far right about it. It was low tax. It was free markets. It was keep immigration down or not have too much immigration at all and all the rest of it. You've also got this problem with Nigel Farage seeming to have better relationships with Trump than Conservatives.
Yeah, well, two things there. I mean, firstly, there's nothing new in the manifesto, as you say. I mean, the UKIP manifesto in 2003 was exactly the same. It was a sort of Jack and Jill's Thatcherism, if you like, sort of very simple ideas. But the truth is, Farage's parties, and they are in plural, I'm afraid, have never managed to run anything. I mean, they can't. They've never been able to run a council, let alone a government. And the simple ideas, I'm afraid, is the same problem or the same mistake that Liz Truss made. That the idea that really solving these problems is dead simple. Again, Margaret Thatcher would never have made that mistake, and she didn't. So I think, you know, he's a charming man. He's clever. You shouldn't underestimate his intelligence. He's really, really smart. But, you know, being close to Trump, lots of people are close to Trump for a short period of time, and then they fall out with them, you know.
Really? So you're suggesting that the bromance might end any day soon?
The romance might end sometime soon. I mean, it depends on the first time you pick an argument with him. I mean, look, if you look back at the early Trump, the first Trump presidency, he lost his chiefs of staff. He lost all sorts of people in the first year. Now, what you got to understand about Trump is Trump will do what he thinks is best for America, and he will be ruthless about it. He won't worry too much about alliances. He'll have a fairly short-term view. And, you know, it's not all bad. I mean, look, I mean, we've got the Gaza resolution coming because they're afraid of having to deal with Trump. You know, he's the great unknown. And in international affairs, that's really valuable, I'm afraid. I mean, you know, I always used to think that Obama is the president that Putin would have picked to oppose him. Why? Because Obama calculates everything. Everything's a sort of chess game, and the Russians are broadly better at chess than we are. So, you know, he could do that. He can't calculate Trump. He can't know how Trump will move and how Trump will work. And we have to take a very clinical and analytical approach to Trump. Work out where we have common interest and where our nations have common interest, and then play for those negotiations. It won't be decided on the basis that, you know, I like this bloke or I like that bloke. That will be put to one side by Trump. I mean, again, don't underestimate Trump. You know, he's cleverer than people give him credit for. I mean, he's not a particularly nice man, and I'm not sure I would pick him as a friend. But he's going to be a very tough, very pro-American. May sound odd to say it, but a very pro-American president. So Nigel's advantage. You know, he knows him, he likes him. He sort of picked him early. Last one of the time, I remember ringing him up once, and he was actually in, I think, Des Moines, Iowa, actually at one of the primaries. So, you know, it's a real friendship, but it won't count for much when it comes to real negotiations.
So, David, I've only got a few more minutes left with you. Can you tell me what the latest is on your sort of quest for Lucy Letby's case to be re-examined? Where are you with it now? You think she's innocent, or you think she's been a victim of a miscarriage of justice? Because they are two different things.
A little bit of both, in truth. I mean, I think what looks most likely now is that the spike in deaths, the only actual fact we know in all of this, in truth, is the spike in death. And it looks to me very much now like the cause of that was pretty poor care, very poor care in the campus of Chester Hospital. I mean, mistakes made by medics, poor levels of support, inadequate resources, not enough qualified doctors or nurses, and that's the real reason, I think. So that battle will go on for two reasons. One, or three. One, because Letby, I think, is innocent. Two, because if we don't fix this sort of thing, if we allow someone to be scapegoated for real failures in the system, the National Health Service are going to have many, many more unnecessary infant deaths. And the third thing is the court system clearly doesn't know how to deal with its so-called independent evidence. This was pointed up by the Law Commission in 2011. We did nothing about it. We've got something like 500 miscarriages of justice over modern times. It's partly because the court system can't cope with really difficult medical and statistical evidence, and we need to fix that. All those three things come out of this one case.
OK, so David, very briefly, have you had contact with Lucy Letby directly, and would you consider visiting her in prison?
Well, no, I haven't had contact with her. I mean, if I was asked to visit her, I probably would. But I don't think, I mean, truth be told, I've had to be incredibly analytical and almost distant over this. I mean, I didn't really pursue the case until I spent 3 months studying the data and the day-by-day accounts of the court. And that's because, you know, you don't want to get emotionally involved when it's a really, really tough scientific and mathematical case, which is what it is. And so I had to, as it were, deploy those skills. And, you know, truth be told, seeing her wouldn't change my view either way. I mean, frankly, I've known a number of psychopaths, and every single one of them has been charming and persuasive. And there are quite a lot of people who are improperly convicted are not charming. They're broken. They're difficult. So I don't think I gain anything from it. But if she wants to see me, I'll see her. But the simple truth is that's not driving. That's not driving. What's driving this is facts and proper analysis, where I think the court's gone wrong.
OK, so David Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the businessman and Tory life peer Lord Moynihan. He's going to join me to discuss the new volume of his book, Return to Growth, How to Fix the Economy. Who does he blame for the current state of our finances? This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Well, we hold on to the cloudy theme and feeling cold, with some rain for some in the west. So through this morning and the rest of the afternoon, then a cloudy picture across much of the UK, with drizzle and perhaps even some snow grains just moving their way northwards into the Midlands. Further towards the north, as particularly across northern parts of Scotland, that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine through this afternoon, with rain gradually trying to approach from the west into Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Otherwise, a cold feeling day, especially underneath this blanket of cloud, mildest temperatures further towards the west. As we go through Sunday evening and overnight, then we hold on to the clearest skies across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. Temperatures quickly falling away here, perhaps with a touch of frost. We'll start to see this weather front approach the Western Isles, bringing some rain, and for western parts of Northern Ireland as well, but colder across northern England and Wales. We may see some breaks in the cloud to give a touch of frost as well, but otherwise largely dry with a lot of cloud as we go Sunday night and into Monday morning. So as we go through the evening, then we've got this band of rain continuing to move its way slowly eastwards into western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and eventually into northern England. Across much of England and Wales, though, hold on to a lot of cloud. Some clear spells that may allow temperatures to fall to give a touch of frost and some mist and fog patches. So another cold start to Monday morning, touch of frost in places, but again, a lot of cloud around. There will be some showers across northwestern parts of Scotland with some sunshine here and some rain just sinking into parts of northern Wales as well. But on the whole, largely a dry picture on Monday. Temperature just slightly up on what we've seen over the weekend, highs of 5 to 9 degrees. Bye-bye for now.
This January, history will be made again.
Join GB News as we bring you full coverage of Donald Trump's presidential inauguration.
From the swearing-in ceremony to the celebrations, we'll be there to capture every moment that shapes the next chapter of world politics.
The best guests, live updates and unparalleled insight as Donald Trump becomes the 47th President of the United States. The inauguration tomorrow from 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back. I'm joined in the studio now by businessman and Conservative life peer, Lord Moynihan. Lovely to see you. I love the showcasing of your book. So we've got Return to Growth, How to Fix the Economy. That's volume 1, and you've just produced volume 2.
That's right.
Quite a substantial piece of work, this. Now, we need to know how to fix the economy, but let me, I'm being told to hold it up to the main camera. There we are. There, or there, and there. There we are. Right. There we are. You can't say this hasn't been promoted on GB News, John. But to be fair, it's because the audience very much wants to know how on earth we do return to growth. Before we get on to some of your ideas, Rachel Reeves, I mean, you've written a piece for CapX where you described her as being the victim of karma for all of her criticisms of Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget.
Indeed.
How good or bad do you think the Chancellor is?
Well, I believe Rachel Reeves is in a line of succession from past Conservative governments. You can't say that she is hugely different, except that she's just doubled down on the failed approach that the previous 14 years pursued. And that is to increase the size of government, to raise taxes, and to have more and more regulators, one new regulator a week since they came to power.
Yes. You make the point, actually, in a piece that you wrote for The Telegraph, that things haven't got better under Labour or the Conservatives, that they've, quotes, both screwed up the economy. You make the point as well, is this right? More than half the population is getting more from the state than they contribute in taxes.
In income taxes, yes, that's 54%. And so you've basically, one of the ways I was thinking of describing it recently is you've got a rights-based economy. An economy that is based upon the rights of the people and fulfilling those rights. And arguably, in order to get growth, you have to move to a responsibilities-based economy where people recognise their responsibility to contribute to the state, to contribute to the economy, and to help with growth. Because everybody wants growth. Everybody wants a little bit more next year. They want to help their family more. They want to buy a house, whatever it is. So but it turns out that the more you have a rights-based economy where you grow the size of government bit by bit and you grow regulators to enforce all of those rights, your growth goes down to almost nothing. Now, it's very interesting. Everybody talks about growth in GDP, but that's actually quite the wrong way to look at it because, for example, the OBR, the Office of Budget and Responsibility, encourages every chancellor to open up the door to immigration. If you read the OBR's report, it's amazing. They say, we assume that every immigrant has a full-time job and doesn't bring any dependents, which, as we all know, is ludicrous.
Yeah, they also bake in about 360,000 people coming here every year, which is not really in line with anyone's manifesto, I don't think.
Well, but it's only half what actually do come in. And And because of that assumption, they say, oh, therefore the economy is going to grow, because all these lovely immigrants, every single one is going to work. None of them are going to bring independence, so there's not going to be any problem with schools or hospitals or things like that. And we all know that that's completely not true. There's a category called family immigration, which is, I think, several 100,000 now coming in, where you bring in your dependents. So straightforwardly, the OBR assumption isn't true. Now, what you have to look at anyway is GDP per capita. And if GDP is going up 0.5% a year, which is the best that, you know, they think they can come up with, I don't think it will, but if it goes up 0.5% a year, but the population goes up by 1% or more a year, then GDP per capita goes down.
Yeah.
And Kemi, the leader of the opposition, picked up on this, where in her speech last week she talked about individual recessions. Because if GDP per capita is going down, the average person is seeing less and less each year. Less and less. And so there are tens of millions of people who are getting less each year right now in this economy and have been doing so for the last 15 years or so.
John, we're running out of time because we've got to cross to Washington, D.C., so I'm going to ask you a couple of kind of quick-fire predictions. What do you think is going to happen regrowth? Are we going to go into recession this year? Yes or no?
I think almost certainly. I take a microeconomic, not a macroeconomic point of view.
Fair enough. All right, so almost certainly into recession. What do you think will happen to interest rates, up or down?
Probably up.
Do you think there'll have to be an emergency budget in the spring?
I have absolutely no idea. That's up to them, and they could do anything.
And what do you think will happen to taxes? Because she's ruled out borrowing more because of her fiscal rules. There's an umming and ahhing going on about cutting the size of the state, which kind of suggests that taxes going up is an inevitability. What do you think?
Tax rates will go up, but the tax take will not.
Yes, the Laffer curve.
That's the problem. So the deficit will go up, so borrowing will go up, and down the road you've got the IMF sniffing around saying, if this carries on, we're going to have to step in. And then you're back in Dennis Healey land.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
God forbid. Lord Moynihan, thank you very much. Here's your book again, How to Fix Growth, How to Return to Growth and Fix the Economy. I do urge you to read it because there's some great ideas in there. Sorry to cut you short, but we do have to go back to Washington, D.C. because there's a big event happening tomorrow night. It's called the inauguration of Donald Trump ×2. We'll be back in just a moment, but first, here's the weather.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello. Well, if it's some winter sunshine you're after across Europe, it's not all that promising. There's a lot of unsettled weather around. So there's heavy spells of rain across parts of Madeira and Spain and Portugal with this area of low pressure. Another area of low pressure across central Mediterranean, bringing outbreaks of rain, strong winds and even some mountain snow. Best of the sunshine really confined towards Eastern Europe, otherwise staying largely unsettled. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lauren, let's start with this, shall we? How children's TV may be harming, not helping young minds.
Yeah, so this is an article in the Express today, a big double-page spread as a result of some new research in a new book that's coming out by a child psychologist, saying that children's television, and I think perhaps more importantly, the way that children consume television and video product now is perhaps not as healthy for them as we would hope it would be. And there's quite some distance from children's television of the past last of the sort of the bagpuss and clangers and Ivor the Engine era. And I think what's interesting about this is particularly the how children's television is consumed angle, because children are now put in front of screens significantly more often than they were certainly when I think we were growing up. The content that they are consuming is not great for their brains and their learning and development, which Floella Benjamin of children's television fame is now leading a big crusade to say that some of this is really, really bad for children.
These days, they're not watching the TV that we all watched when we were growing up. They're not even watching GB News in the morning.
What are they
would you
thinking?
believe it? But they are watching this absolute drivel all day long on YouTube, and because obviously all our TVs are now connected to the internet, or they're getting TikTok on their TV. It's not even, so they don't even necessarily have to have smartphones or iPads. They can just watch this stuff on TV, and it is rubbish. They are watching it and they're obsessed with it. Oh God, Skibbity Toilet or something. Have you heard of this?
No.
No? Well, you'll have viewers who have got who are parents of sort of 13-year-olds, and this Skibbity Toilet thing is, they're all obsessed with it, and this is a really annoying sort of theme tune or thing that they sing at you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is...
You're
the failure
deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Right, we're going to enter a little bit of Americana right now because we've got a number of key events coming up. We've got a rally tonight for Donald Trump, of course. We've got celebrations mounting tomorrow in Washington for his inauguration. That's going to have to be held inside because temperatures in DC are set to plummet to minus 11 to 15. Sounds very, very chilly. Think of the GB News correspondents who are out there right now doing live broadcasts in the chilly weather. So first of all, we're going to speak to Tim Hames, who has written a new book about Trump 2, Trump Mark 2. Here we have it. Former Times journalist joins me in the studio now, Tim. And we are hoping that former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood will join us from Washington, D.C. We're trying to chase him down the streets of the Capitol. So we'll speak to you first, Tim. Now, you say, and I love the blurb on the back of this book, it says, this time, everything is different. Why do you say that? Why will Trump 2 be different to Trump 1, do you think?
Well, for a start, there's only been one other instance in American history where somebody has been president, lost office and come back again, and that was Grover Cleveland in the 1880s and 1890s. So it's probably not a live precedent for us at the moment. So it's just very unusual. And so in many ways, what we're about to see is a second first term, not a normal second term. And normal second terms for American presidents are often rather anticlimactical. They've sort of run out of political puff, and they tend to lose control of Congress to their opponents, and they spend their last 2 years desperately trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize and normally falling short. That is not going to be the model this time.
Yeah.
Trump has come back in with a much stronger hand than anyone expected. His opponents are in disarray. But he knows that he's only got maybe 18 months, at least in terms of his American domestic agenda, before the electoral clock starts ticking again, and the Democrats might take the House back in 2026. In fact, it would be very surprising if they didn't. And once you get beyond that point, people start sort of saying, who's coming next?
Yes.
Rather than, what do you want to do?
Also, I think what's a bit different this time round, if you look at some of the appointments, for instance, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's a massive personality, particularly among Democrats, to be honest, and others, is that, I mean, it's still the Trump show, right? But, like, he's thickened that front bench and he's made sure that he's got big personalities there to carry the load, which also, I guess, gives him broader spectrum appeal.
Absolutely.
I mean, what do you think of RFK Jr., for instance? Why do you think he's done that? Because the guy's controversial. He's an anti-vaxxer. He's got some very suspect ideas about health, and yet now he's in charge of the health department.
Well, yes, that's true. I can see why his personalities, they would gel.
Yeah.
And I could see a kind of almost mischievous element to Donald Trump managing to co-opt Kennedy into his own camp. And, you know, Mr. Kennedy was running for president. He was only running at 1%, but everyone thought this is a very, very close election, so 1% is worth having. So there is some logic to it. It will be fascinating to see how he performs in the Senate confirmation hearings, because if he goes too far off-piste, even in the current very, very benign climate for the incoming president, there will be 2 or 3 Republican senators who've got their own elections coming up in 2026 who will say to themselves...
Well, tell me about that. I mean, in the Republican camp, it's not all overwhelmingly supportive of Donald Trump, is it?
No, but it's, from his point of view, it's a much better situation when he first won.
Yes.
In 2017, I don't think he'd expected to win. I'm not even convinced he necessarily wanted to win that badly.
Not sure if Melania wanted him to win. I know that much for sure. But she seems happier now. But carry on,
Indeed. And he didn't really have his people.
No.
There were the family and there was this army of lawyers. This man's been involved in more than 4,000 lawsuits in his life.
Crazy.
So there was that.
Somebody's made some serious wedge from that, haven't they?
Yes, but there wasn't really a Trump camp. And he had a series of slogans, most of which were no longer than 4 words.
I know, although Make America Great Again may be one of the best slogans of the last 100 years, isn't it?
It's further proof of simplicity is genius.
Yes.
But, for example, on trade and tariffs, which is going to be a very, very controversial area.
Yeah, well, how's that going to play out for us, do you think?
Last time round, he didn't really have any kind of intellectual ballast behind it. And now there are several different, almost competing pro-tariff think tanks and Trumpian pressure groups, all with their own pet scheme as to how large tariffs should be and on whom should they be imposed.
But on that, and we've seen this recently with the ceasefire deal, you know, his unpredictability is one of his key strengths. Where's he going to go next?
Yeah.
We have the threat of tariffs being imposed. Will that be enacted on?
Oh, I think...
Particularly in relation to the UK.
I mean, the working assumption has to be that there will be a tariff policy of some sort. I think the details in terms of which countries are affected by most and which sectors are affected most and which individual companies at the moment, they're up in the air. And what British business should do, if it's smart, is actually to do some research as to whether or not their sector and their company might or might not be caught in the crossfire and then lobby the British government, you know, to try and do their best to protect them.
OK.
But tariffs, a classic example of why Trump has a history. Tariffs have been around American politics for yonks. The 4 presidents who are carved into Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt, were all massively pro-tariffs.
Yeah, protectionism, it's a kind of theme of American presidencies. Final question, because I think we do have Tobias Ellwood, who's just getting mic'd up in Washington, D.C. next. He's seemingly helped to broker some kind of solution in the Middle East. Let's see if it holds, and God willing, let's see some of these hostages released this afternoon. But equally, do you think he needs a pretty rapid solution to the Ukraine-Russia conflict?
He will certainly want one. The United States has spent $61 billion in military aid directly to Ukraine and quite a lot more in other forms of humanitarian assistance. And Mr. Trump doesn't really like long and expensive wars.
No.
They're bad for business.
Indeed.
So he will be looking to push for a deal. And I think you can see the outlines of what a deal might be. The complexity is going to be around the side letters, if you like, because what Putin will want is, you know, I want to be able to travel again. I want my friends to be able to get their bank accounts again.
Yeah.
And Trump's quite likely to be willing to say yes. And the likes of Keir Starmer, President Macron, are likely to say, what?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's going to be the real sticking point. Less where you draw the line on the map in Ukraine than what are the terms and conditions going forward.
Tim Hames, thank you very much indeed. Trump 2, why he won and what it means for the world is available now. We're doing lots of book promotions today, but we do like guests who know what they're talking about, Tim. So thank you very much. And we're going to be speaking to Tobias Ellwood next, who can perhaps give us... Oh, no, in fact, there's no break. I'm going to Tobias right now. Tobias, how's Washington, D.C.? I hope you're not too chilly. Oh, you're indoors. Thank goodness.
I am indoors, yes.
Right.
It was too cold and too dark. Otherwise, I've been delighted to have been reporting from the Mall. But yes, the inauguration ceremony has changed because there's going to be temperatures plummeting to -6 degrees. So it's all moved inside, and that's caused absolute chaos for everybody, because you might remember the pictures from previous inaugurations. The Mall is packed with thousands and thousands of people that come across the country. And now it's unclear as to how things will unfold. We'll have more announcements today.
Now, Tobias, I know you've obviously got some history with America. I think you were born in America, weren't you? You've got dual citizenship, so you've got a vested interest. But you haven't always been a champion or indeed a fan of Donald Trump. Have you changed your mind a little bit on the president-elect, not least in light of recent events in the Middle East?
No, I'm pretty consistent, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's indeed party members and leaders in the UK. I spell out what I believe should be the direction of travel, and I'm critical if I don't agree with them, and that's the way I am. And we need to understand and recognise that Donald Trump is here to stay for 4 years, and whether you like Donald Trump returning or not, the United States is Britain's closest security ally, and therefore we have to engage. And that's why I'm here, to meet senators, to have meetings with the people from the Pentagon, catching up with our ambassador here. I'm speaking at Atlantic Council, meeting with Jens Stoltenberg as well. So we need to engage. We need to have back channels. We need to have conversations, because the world, as we've discussed many times, is getting more dangerous, not less.
Yeah, well, put your former soldier hat on and indeed your former defence minister hat on for just a moment, because we've already heard from the Israeli foreign minister about the hostage releases today, and basically sort of casting doubt over whether the ceasefire will hold if Hamas remains in power. How do you think this is going to be playing out over the course of the next few days?
Well, from the very start, this has been a stumbling block, and perhaps the one aspect of Netanyahu's approach to dealing with Gaza is, where does all the military success on the battlefield lead to? They say they've destroyed Hamas, but the Americans here are saying that actually Hamas has been able to recruit as many people to fill the fighters who have been killed, and therefore Hamas remains. And I'm really pleased, as we all are, that this ceasefire is finally here, that hostages are being released. But ultimately, the governance of Gaza and its security, these long-term questions remain unresolved, and it's unclear what Israel would like to do moving forward. And hopefully, during the 6-week period of this ceasefire, negotiations can advance this. But Netanyahu has, as I stress, been absent of any idea, of any proposal, any strategy where the destruction of Gaza and the scale that it's taking place will actually lead to long-term peace.
What impact do you think Trump 2.0, if we can call it that, will have on global affairs? I've just been speaking to the former Times journalist and the author of a new book about Trump, Tim Hames, about what might be happening next in Ukraine. What's your prediction for how Trump will handle that? We know his boast. He said he would get that conflict sorted out in 24 hours. Tim's made the point that it's going to be complex, not just in terms of carving up the land that Putin has taken, but equally what Putin will demand in return in terms of his own international freedom to move, his own international standing, sanctions and so on.
Well, Trump 2.0, you know, I've witnessed a few inaugurations in the past, and this time it feels very, very different indeed. We're about to witness a new experiment in US governance that's never been attempted before. This is a revolution in how things are done. And it has created a sense of excitement and indeed nervousness, even from the Republicans, not knowing how this will unfold. And its impact on America's place in the world, its role on the international stage, its economic and geostrategic relationships with both friends and indeed foes. It's going to be very unpredictable indeed. And he has 2 years, let's not forget, to make his mark before the next US midterm elections change the complexion of Congress and slow his ability to secure any new legislation. But immediately we can expect a mountain of executive orders, presidential decrees, if you like, changes which Trump can push through without congressional approval, which I'm sure his inauguration and rally speeches will touch on, which will include migration, deportations, and TikTok and so on. But his core message will be that the world is changing fast, it's becoming more dangerous and more geopolitically challenging. It's time to forget the post-World War II world order as it was, and it's time to put America's interests first, even if that hastens a Cold War with China. So this is a real step into the unknown.
But you're saying there that, you know, actually it could precipitate more conflict, not less, because there's an alternative theory that he actually could be the so-called president of peace. I mean, Piers Morgan suggested to me at The Telegraph in the week, you know, he could be in line for a Nobel Peace Prize. What do you make of that claim briefly, Tobias?
Well, I'm just curious that even Piers Morgan, it's funny how over here people are falling over themselves. Even the comedians are hesitating to criticize Donald Trump. That's the sort of power, the influence that he now has, because, as I say, we don't know where this will unfold. If he gets it right, you could even see the Constitution bizarrely changed to keep him on for another 4 years. I think that's unlikely. But this is the sort of talk that's taking place here in Washington. And it is a move away, as your question implies, from what American leaders have done in the past, is use their global power with responsibility to be defender of our world order, to promote universal values. And Donald Trump will do things very differently. So could he argue and get deals done and so forth? I don't think his interest is in these wider issues. It's all about whether America benefits. And if America benefits, then Donald Trump will wade in. But if America doesn't, and Ukraine is a great example of that, because from his perspective, he doesn't see European security as something that he should be interested in. America should not pay for that. Britain and the European countries should, which is why he's pressing for us to increase our defense budgets. That's the approach. That's the mindset in which Donald Trump and this administration is embarking on.
All right, Tobias Ellwood, thanks so much for joining us today. You've got a long day. There's a rally ahead and then the inauguration on Monday night. Enjoy it both, and thank you very much for your time. And thank you indeed to all of my guests today. I'm going to be back next week as ever at 9:30, but up next, of course, is Michael Portillo with his 11 o'clock GB News show. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, this is your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. For many of us today, it is very similar to Saturday, a widely cloudy picture. But we do have a slight change with this very long cold front that's stretching itself out in the west from parts of Portugal and Iberia. But it is now starting to push its way into parts of Northern Ireland and will eventually arrive into western Scotland later on today as well. It's a fairly weak affair, but it is going to bring some patchy outbreaks of drizzle here. Elsewhere, though, that cloud is certainly going to be in place right across the board. Underneath that, there is the potential for some patchy drizzle, maybe even some snow grains as well, which is frozen drizzle. With all the cloud around and very little sunshine, though, it is going to be feeling particularly chilly across England and Wales, highs of 2-3 degrees Celsius in places.